A street boy guided by faith survives under canopies and prayers in a city that has forgotten him. His silent prayer makes a cruel businessman walk again, triggering greed, persecution, and injustice. But it's not the miracles, it's the transformation of hearts that reveals the true power of his presence. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Now on with the story. The night fell heavy over Fifth Avenue, bringing with it the smell of rain that hadn't yet found the courage to descend. The lights of the office buildings began to extinguish one by one, like candles being blown out at the end of a party to which few were invited. On the sidewalk in front of one of the region's largest towers of glass and concrete, a boy of just 8 years old watched the movement with eyes that seemed to hold much more history than should fit in someone so small. Gabriel. That was his name, though few people cared to know it. To most of the hurried passers-by who walked past him every day, the boy was just another one among many, as invisible as the wind that stirred his disheveled hair. He wore a worn-out Yankees t-shirt, 3 sizes too big for his frail body, and shorts torn at the hem. His bare feet already knew by heart every irregularity of the asphalt in that area. That night, Gabriel was not alone. Beside him, sitting on a piece of cardboard that served as a mattress, was his Walter, a man with tired eyes and calloused hands who had called that awning home for over a decade. It was Walter who had found Gabriel 3 months ago, shivering with cold and hunger on a particularly cruel January night. It was he who shared his thin blanket, who taught the boy where to find food, who showed him which places were safe and which should be avoided. What Gabriel kept inside his heart, however, not even Walter knew completely. The boy had memories that still hurt when he closed his eyes. He remembered his father, Orville, a strong man who worked as a bricklayer and died in a fall from scaffolding at a construction site in the Bronx. He remembered his mother, Cecilia, who used to be cheerful and would sing while she cooked, but who after the accident lost herself in bottle after bottle until one day she simply couldn't take care of a child anymore. Gabriel had run away from home when he realized his mother no longer recognized him, when she started talking to people who weren't there, when she began to forget to buy food and to sell everything they had to get more of that drink that turned her into someone else. He was only 7 years old at the time, but something inside him told him he had to leave, that he needed to survive. And that's what he did. He survived, with the help of Walter and Mrs. Francis, a lady who sold flowers at the subway station and always saved a buttered roll for the boy. With the help of Mr. Joe, who had a hot dog stand at the street market and occasionally let Gabriel eat the ones that were left over. They were small gestures that kept not only his body functioning, but also his hope alive. Because Gabriel had something the street hadn't managed to steal from him yet: faith. Every night, before sleeping, the boy would join his hands and pray. He thanked God for the day that had passed, for the people who crossed his path, for the food he managed to find. He asked for protection and strength. And he always finished with the same phrase his mother used to say before everything fell apart: God knows all things, and in his own time everything will be set right. While Gabriel murmured his prayers that night, on the other side of the city, in one of New York's most affluent neighborhoods, an imposing mansion stood like a monument to wealth and power. This was where Octavian Hawthorne lived, one of the richest businessmen in the country. His fortune had been built on deals many preferred not to question, agreements made in closed rooms, decisions that benefited a few and harmed many. Octavian had everything money could buy except the ability to walk. 2 years ago, his own arrogance had put him in that wheelchair. He had insisted on piloting his own helicopter in a storm, ignoring all warnings, and the subsequent crash was devastating. The doctors said he was lucky to be alive, but Octavian didn't feel lucky. He felt trapped in a body that no longer obeyed his will. The mansion was large, luxurious, and completely devoid of affection. His wife, Veronica, was a woman of beauty constructed in expensive cosmetic clinics, who married him for his last name and his bank account. Not necessarily in that order. She spent her days between lunches with equally empty friends and endless sessions of beauty treatments. At night, she would lock herself in her room and pretend her husband didn't exist. The couple's son, Bernard, was 15, and already showed signs of having inherited the worst of his father. He was cruel without reason, arrogant without basis, and incapable of seeing value in anyone who couldn't offer him something in return. At the exorbitant private school where he studied, he led a group of boys who amused themselves by humiliating their more fragile classmates. His teachers looked the other way. After all, the Hawthorne family's annual donation maintained a good portion of the school's renovations. And then there was the family's driver, Ronald, a middle-aged man who had served the Hawthornes for over 10 years. Ronald had learned from his employer to despise those with less, to see poverty as a character flaw rather than a circumstance. He taught this to his own daughter, Larissa, a 22-year-old university student who insisted on defying her father by volunteering for social projects. On that same night that Gabriel prayed under the awning on Fifth Avenue, Octavian was in his library, drinking imported whiskey and flipping through financial reports with little interest. His body ached as it always did, a phantom pain that the medication couldn't reach. But it was the pain of impotence that bothered him most, the feeling of being less than he was before, of depending on others for simple things. Bernard entered the library without knocking, as he always did. He threw his backpack on the leather sofa and poured himself a glass of the same whiskey his father was drinking. "You're 15, Bernard," Octavian said, with little enthusiasm in the reprimand. "And how old were you when you had your first?" the boy retorted with a cynical smile. Octavian didn't answer. Bernard was right after all. The businessman finished his glass and poured another. "Dad, Ronald's taking me to school late tomorrow. I'm meeting the guys at the mall first." "Do whatever you want," Octavian muttered, his eyes fixed on the flames in the fireplace. Bernard was almost out the door when he stopped and looked back. "You know, Dad, sometimes I think you got less annoying after the accident. Before, you were always on my case about grades, wanting me to be the best. Now you barely talk to me." The casual cruelty in the boy's voice was stunning. Octavian felt something tighten in his chest but said nothing. Bernard left, leaving his father alone with his bitter thoughts. The next day, Bernard was in the back seat of the car, Ronald at the wheel, when they stopped at a red light in Midtown Manhattan. That's when the boy saw Gabriel. The child was standing in front of a bakery, staring intently at the window filled with fresh bread and cakes he could never afford. "Look at that street kid," Bernard said, pointing. "I bet he's planning to steal something." Ronald followed the boy's gaze. "These people need to disappear from the streets. They make the whole city look dirty." "You should lock him in the trunk and dump him somewhere far away," Bernard joked, but there was something in his eyes that didn't seem entirely like a joke. "Careful what you say, Master Bernard. The police don't like jokes about things like that." The light turned green and they drove on. But the image of Gabriel stuck in Bernard's mind, not out of compassion, but for something different, a morbid curiosity perhaps, or just the boredom of someone who has everything and therefore values nothing. 3 days. Later, Bernard convinced Ronald to drive through the same area again. And there was Gabriel in the same spot, with the same worn-out clothes, the same bare feet. This time, Bernard asked Ronald to stop the car. "What are you going to do?" the driver asked, suspicious. "I just want to talk to him. I have an idea." Ronald grumbled but obeyed. Bernard got out of the car and approached Gabriel, who instinctively recoiled. "Calm down, kid. I'm not going to hurt you," Bernard said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "What's your name?" Gabriel hesitated but answered, softly. "Gabriel." "Gabriel," Bernard repeated, as if tasting the name. "You live on the street, right?" The boy nodded, his eyes watchful, searching for signs of danger. "What if I told you I could give you food, a hot shower? Would you accept?" Gabriel frowned. He had already learned that nothing in life came for free, especially from rich people. "Why would you do that?" Bernard shrugged. "Because I can, and because I think it's funny." It wasn't a good answer, but it was honest in a twisted way. Gabriel looked at the luxury car, at Ronald watching everything from the driver's seat, and then back at Bernard. Something in him said to refuse, to run away. But the promise of food and a hot shower was too tempting for someone who hadn't bathed in days and whose last decent meal had been even longer ago. "Okay," Gabriel said, his voice almost lost in the noise of the avenue. Bernard smiled, the way malicious people smile when they get what they want. "Get in the car." Gabriel got in. Ronald looked at the boy in the rearview mirror with a barely disguised expression of disgust, but he drove in silence. The journey to the affluent neighborhood took almost 40 minutes. Gabriel looked out the window, watching the city change around him. The streets became cleaner, the houses bigger, the walls higher. When they arrived at the Hawthorne mansion, Gabriel couldn't hide his amazement. He had never seen such a big house. It looked like a castle from the movies. Bernard noticed his reaction, and his smile became even more wicked. "Come on," he said, pulling Gabriel by the arm. They entered through the back door, passing through the immense kitchen where a middle-aged housekeeper, Mrs. Davis, was preparing lunch. She looked at Gabriel with surprise and then with concern, but said nothing. She had learned long ago that meddling in the Hawthorne family's affairs was a quick path to unemployment. Bernard led Gabriel to the main living room, where Octavian was in his wheelchair reading the newspaper. The businessman raised his eyes and narrowed them upon seeing the street boy standing there, dirty and out of place amidst all that luxury. "Bernard, what is this nonsense?" "I found him on the street, Dad. They say he has a special gift." Octavian let out a short, humorless laugh. "A gift? This kid has hunger, not a gift." "It's a real gift," Bernard insisted, and Gabriel realized he was being used in some kind of cruel game he didn't yet fully understand. "They say he has the power to heal people, that he just has to pray and miracles happen." Gabriel's eyes widened. He had never told that to anyone, but maybe Bernard had heard some rumor on the street, some distorted story. Because Gabriel did pray, and sometimes good things happened afterward. But he had never attributed it to himself. It was God who did it, not him. Octavian looked at his son and then at Gabriel. There was something perverse about the whole situation that the businessman recognized immediately, because he himself had that same kind of perversity within him. "So this is the so-called miracle healer?" Octavian said, his voice laden with sarcasm. "Tell me something, boy. Do you think you can make me walk again?" Gabriel didn't know what to say. He felt like he was falling into a trap, but couldn't see the way out. "I don't heal anyone, sir," he said, his voice trembling. "I just pray, and God decides." "How convenient," Octavian laughed. "So if it doesn't work, it's God's fault, not yours." Bernard was loving it. He watched the humiliation unfold and delighted in every second. But there was something in Gabriel's expression, a strange dignity for someone so small and in such a vulnerable situation, that began to bother even him. "Pray then," Octavian ordered. "Since you've come all this way, show me this so-called gift. Say your magic prayer and heal me." Gabriel closed his eyes. He knew he was being ridiculed, but he prayed anyway. Not because he believed he could change the situation, but because it was what he always did when he didn't know what else to do. He prayed in silence, the words forming only in his heart. He asked for that bitter man in the wheelchair. He asked for peace for him. He asked for healing, not just of the body, but of the soul. When he opened his eyes, Octavian was still there, sitting motionless with that scornful expression on his face. "Done?" the businessman asked. Gabriel nodded. "Great. Now get out of my house before I call the police for trespassing." Ronald appeared as if summoned, grabbed Gabriel by the arm with unnecessary force and dragged him out. The boy was thrown outside the electronic gate, which closed with a metallic and definitive sound. Gabriel stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. He felt used, humiliated, smaller than he already felt. He began to walk back to his known territory, to the awning where Walter was probably already worried about his absence. As he walked, the tears he had held back inside finally began to stream down his face. Not for the humiliation, but for something bigger, for feeling that he had failed in some way, that his prayer hadn't been enough. But then he remembered his mother's words, "God knows all things, and in his own time everything will be set right." And Gabriel decided to believe in that, because it was all he had left. Inside the mansion, Octavian had returned to his routine of bitterness and medication. Bernard went to his room to play video games, already bored with the game he had invented. Ronald went back to the garage, where he spent most of his time. No one was paying attention when, in the middle of the night, Octavian woke up with a strange sensation in his legs. A sensation he hadn't had in 2 years. A sensation the doctors had said he would never have again. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a tingling. Octavian lay absolutely still in bed, afraid that any movement would break whatever was happening. He took a deep breath and tried to wiggle his toes, and they moved. For the first time in 2 years, Octavian Hawthorne's toes moved. The businessman let out a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. He tried again, and it worked again. It wasn't much. It wasn't even close to walking, but it was something. It was infinitely more than nothing. And in the back of his mind, in a place he didn't want to acknowledge, Octavian thought of the street boy with bare feet and hands joined in prayer. The following days were the strangest of Octavian Hawthorne's life. The sensation in his legs gradually increased, like a stubborn plant sprouting through concrete. On the 3rd day after meeting Gabriel, he could move his entire legs. On the 5th day, he felt pain when he bumped his foot on the side of the bed, and for the first time in his life, he was grateful to feel pain. On the 7th day, with the help of 2 private nurses and a great deal of determination, Octavian stood up. Veronica nearly fainted when she saw her husband standing in the living room. She was coming down the stairs in the morning, still in her silk robe, when she was met with the impossible sight. The coffee cup she was carrying fell to the marble floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces. "Octavian," she whispered, her voice failing. How is this possible?" The businessman held on tightly to one of the nurse's arms, his legs still trembling but unquestionably working. There was a strange glint in his eyes, something between triumph and fear. "It happened," was all he said. "It just happened." Veronica approached slowly, as if seeing a ghost. She touched her husband's arm, making sure he was real, but the doctors said it was impossible, that the spinal cord injury was permanent. The doctors were wrong. The news spread through the mansion like wildfire. Mrs. Davis made the sign of the cross 3 times when she heard. Ronald remained silent, processing the information with suspicion. Bernard just shrugged, more interested in his phone than in what seemed to be a miracle happening right under his nose. But Octavian was no fool. He knew this wasn't natural. He knew every word the best neurologists in the country had said about his case. Complete spinal cord injury, permanent paralysis, no chance of recovery. And yet, there he was, walking unsteadily but walking, defying every diagnosis, every prognosis, every law of medicine he knew. And in the back of his mind, stubborn as a splinter that won't come out, was the image of that street boy. Those eyes closed in prayer. Those small dirty hands joined in silent supplication. "No," Octavian said to himself alone in his office that night. "This is absurd. It was a coincidence. Spontaneous recovery. It happens." But a part of him, the part he usually successfully ignored, knew the truth. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Gabriel had returned to his routine of survival. The episode at the mansion had been seared into his memory as another of the many humiliations life imposed on him, but he had learned not to cling to pain. He moved on because that's what you did. He kept waking up, looking for food, helping his Walter, talking to Mrs. Francis, praying before he slept. It was Walter who noticed that Gabriel was quieter than usual. "Did something happen, boy?" the old man asked, as they shared a sandwich someone had left on a park bench. Gabriel hesitated, but eventually told him. He told him about the rich boy who took him to the mansion, about the man in the wheelchair who mocked him, about the prayer he said, and the way he was thrown out afterward. Walter listened in silence, nodding his head from time to time. "Rich people are like that," the old man said when Gabriel finished. "They think poor people are toys. But you did the right thing, my son. You prayed. The rest isn't up to us." Gabriel nodded, feeling a little better for having shared the burden. But the story wasn't over. Not for Octavian. 2 weeks after starting to walk again, Octavian went to the hospital for a full checkup. He wanted answers. He needed explanations that made sense within the rational world he knew. The medical team was perplexed. They repeated the tests 3 times. They called specialists from other hospitals. They consulted international medical journals. The previous diagnosis was correct. The injury had been severe, permanent, irreversible. And yet, there was Octavian, walking normally, as if nothing had happened. One of the doctors, a man with white hair and decades of experience, sat across from Octavian and simply said, "I have no scientific explanation for this. It is, by all our current knowledge, impossible." "Then give me a non-scientific explanation," Octavian demanded. The doctor took off his glasses and rubbed his tired eyes. "Mr. Hawthorne, in 40 years of medicine, I've seen 2 recoveries that defied all logic. Both individuals were deeply religious. They called it a miracle. The word hung in the air between them, miracle. Octavian felt something tighten in his chest. He didn't believe in miracles. He didn't believe in God. He didn't believe in anything he couldn't buy, sell, or control. But he believed what he saw, and what he saw were his own legs working when they shouldn't be. It was Veronica who, unintentionally, let the information slip. At a lunch with her friends at the country club, after a few glasses of wine, she commented on her husband's inexplicable recovery. One of her friends was married to a journalist from a major news portal. In 3 days, the story was everywhere. Billionaire businessman makes miraculous recovery after 2 years in a wheelchair. Doctors baffled by Octavian Hawthorne's impossible cure. Miracle or science, the controversial recovery dividing opinions. Octavian was furious with the exposure, but there was no turning back. The phones at the mansion rang off the hook. Journalists camped out at the gate. The story took on a life of its own. And that's how the rumors started. People close to the family, employees, suppliers, everyone had a version. And one of those versions, whispered by the driver of one of the doctors who had treated Octavian, spoke of a street boy who had prayed for the businessman days before the recovery began. The story reached the ears of an investigative reporter named Marcus, a man in his early 30s who worked for a high-rated television program. Marcus didn't believe in miracles, but he believed in good stories. And this one had all the elements: wealth, medical impossibility, and now, apparently, a street boy with healing powers. Marcus began to investigate. He found out that Bernard had been seen with a street boy in the Midtown area. He talked to local merchants, to homeless people, until finally someone mentioned the name, Gabriel. It took another week for Marcus to find the boy. When he finally located him, Gabriel was helping Mrs. Francis organize the flowers at her stand. The reporter approached carefully, recorder in his pocket, camera discreet. "Gabriel?" he called out. The boy turned, suspicious. He had learned to recognize when someone wanted something from him. "My name is Marcus. I'm a journalist. I wanted to talk to you about Octavian Hawthorne." Gabriel felt his stomach tighten. That name again. "I have nothing to say," he said, starting to walk away. "Wait," Marcus went after him. "I don't want to hurt you. I just want to understand what happened. Is it true you prayed for him, that he was in a wheelchair and now he's walking?" Mrs. Francis placed herself between the reporter and Gabriel, as protective as a mother hen with her chick. "Leave the boy alone. He hasn't done anything wrong." "I know that," Marcus said, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. "I just want the truth." Gabriel looked at Mrs. Francis, who gave a slight nod, leaving the decision to him. The boy took a deep breath. "I prayed," he said simply. "That boy brought me there. His father told me to pray, so I prayed. That's all. I don't know if it worked. I don't know anything. But have you prayed for other people before? Has anything like this ever happened?" Gabriel thought of his Walter, who had chronic knee pain that got better after Gabriel prayed for him one night. He thought of Mrs. Francis, who had a terrible cough that disappeared. But he had never connected these things to his prayers. They were just coincidences, weren't they? "It's not me," Gabriel said, looking directly at the reporter. "I just pray. If something happens, it's God, not me." Marcus saw the absolute sincerity in the 8-year-old's eyes and felt something stir within him. This wasn't a hoax, it wasn't a scam. It was just a boy who believed what he was saying. The report aired 3 days later. It showed Gabriel, his face blurred to protect his identity, telling his side of the story. It showed Octavian walking, clearly recovered. It showed the doctors confirming that it was medically impossible. And it ended with the question everyone was asking: could a street boy have the gift of healing? Octavian watched the report alone in his office. When it was over, he sat in the dark for a long time, processing. A part of him was furious with the exposure. Another part, the one he didn't like to acknowledge, was beginning to believe. What if it was true? What if that boy really had some kind of gift? And what if Octavian had access to that gift? Greed, Octavian's old companion, began to whisper in his ear. People would pay fortunes for impossible cures. He could control it. He could profit from it. He could become even more powerful than he already was. "Ronald," Octavian called on the intercom, "I need you to find that street boy, the one named Gabriel, and when you find him, bring him here." On the other end of the line, Ronald hesitated. "Sir, are you sure?" "I am, and be discreet." Ronald found Gabriel 2 days later. It was easier than he expected, because the boy wasn't hiding. He was exactly where he always was, in the same area with the same people. The driver stopped the car and got out. Gabriel recognized him immediately and began to back away. "Calm down," Ronald said, and there was something different in his voice. Less contempt, perhaps, or maybe just calculation. "Mr. Hawthorne wants to talk to you, not to hurt you. He wants to thank you." Gabriel didn't believe him for a second, but when Ronald showed him a $50 bill and said it was just for him to go to the mansion, talk, and come back, the boy thought of the food he could buy for Walter, for Mrs. Francis, for Mr. Joe. "Just talk?" Gabriel asked. "Just talk." "My word." Gabriel made the mistake of believing him. The mansion was even more intimidating on the second visit. This time, he was received not with mockery, but with a kind of interest that was almost worse. Octavian was walking, strong and restored, and there was a strange glint in his eyes when he looked at Gabriel. "Sit," Octavian said, pointing to an expensive armchair. Gabriel sat on the edge, uncomfortable. "You healed me," the businessman said. It wasn't a question. "It wasn't me, sir. I know you just prayed and God performed the miracle." Octavian said it, with a tone that made it clear he didn't fully believe it, but was willing to pretend he did. "Do you know how much people would pay for a cure like mine?" Gabriel began to understand where this was going, and he didn't like it at all. "Millions," Octavian continued. "Billions, perhaps. Rich people, powerful people, all wanting to live longer, live better. And you have the key." "It doesn't work like that," Gabriel protested. "I can't heal whoever I want. I don't control anything." Octavian leaned forward. "But you can try, can't you? You can pray, and sometimes it works. It would be a partnership, you see. I give you a good life, a house, food, school, and you use your gift to help people. Everybody wins." It sounded too good to be true, and Gabriel had learned that things that were too good to be true always came with a price. "And if I say no?" the boy asked, his voice trembling slightly. Octavian's face darkened. "That would be a shame. You, living on the street, starving, when you could have everything. It seems like a waste." It wasn't exactly a threat, but it was close enough. Gabriel stood up. "Thank you, sir, but I don't want to. I prefer the street." It was the wrong answer. Octavian nodded his head, and two things happened at once. Ronald entered through the door, locking it from the inside, and another man, a security guard Gabriel hadn't seen before, blocked the exit to the garden. "Sit down," Octavian said, and this time it wasn't an invitation. Gabriel felt fear rise in his throat. He had made a terrible mistake by coming. "You're going to stay here until you change your mind," Octavian continued. "I have a small room out back, small but comfortable. Food 3 times a day. When you decide to cooperate, we'll talk again." "This is kidnapping," Gabriel said, his voice thin with terror. "This is an opportunity," Octavian corrected. "You just don't see it yet." Gabriel was dragged by the two men to a small room at the back of the mansion. It was indeed small, just a bed, a window too high to reach, and a door that locked from the outside. They threw him inside and locked the door. Gabriel was left in the dark, his heart beating so hard it felt like it would burst from his chest. For the first time in a long while, he felt the urge to truly cry, not the silent tears that sometimes came at night, but a cry of complete despair. But before he could give in to panic, he heard a soft sound, the door opening, and there, with a tray of food and eyes full of compassion, was Mrs. Davis. "Quickly," she whispered. "You have 5 minutes before Ronald comes back. I'm getting you out of here." Gabriel didn't hesitate. He followed the housekeeper through the back corridors of the mansion, through the gardens to their side gate that she opened with a key she took from her apron. In seconds, Gabriel was outside, free. "Run," said Mrs. Davis, "and never come back." Gabriel ran. He ran faster than he had ever run in his life. He ran until his legs ached and his lungs burned. He ran until he was far enough away to feel minimally safe. When he finally stopped, he was back in his familiar territory. And there, sitting on the awning as always, was Walter. The old man saw Gabriel's state and asked no questions. He just opened his arms, and the boy threw himself into them, finally allowing himself to cry. Gabriel's escape caused a silent earthquake in the Hawthorne mansion. When Octavian discovered the boy had escaped, his fury was monumental. He fired Mrs. Davis on the spot, without a word of thanks for her 15 years of dedicated service. The housekeeper left with her dignity intact, but with a heavy heart, worried about the fate of the boy she had tried to help. Octavian mobilized Ronald and 2 more private security guards to find Gabriel. He offered money, made threats, used every resource he had. But the street, community normally invisible to the city's wealthy, closed around the boy like a human shield. Walter spread the word. Gabriel was in danger and needed protection, and the people responded. Mr. Joe from the market started giving warnings when he saw suspicious cars lurking. Mrs. Francis created a system of signals to alert them to danger. Other homeless people, whom Gabriel had helped with his prayers and simple kindness, formed a surveillance network. For the first time, Octavian Hawthorne discovered there were things money couldn't buy and people his threats couldn't reach. Meanwhile, inside the mansion itself, something was changing. Bernard had watched the scene of the thwarted kidnapping, hidden at the top of the stairs. He saw the fear on Gabriel's face as he was dragged away. He heard his father's cold words, and for the first time in his 15 years, he felt ashamed. That feeling didn't leave him in the following days. He tried to ignore it by playing video games for hours, hanging out with his school friends, doing everything he always did. But the image of Gabriel kept coming back. The street boy he had used as a toy, whom he had brought there just to amuse himself with his humiliation, and who was now being hunted because of it. It was during lunch at school that everything changed for Bernard. He was with his usual friends, a group of rich boys who entertained themselves by intimidating the weaker students. That day the target was a new boy, a scholarship student. The boys mocked his second-hand uniform, his worn-out shoes, his old backpack. Bernard watched the scene and suddenly couldn't participate anymore. He saw Gabriel in every insult, saw his own cruelty reflected in his friends' faces, and something inside him simply broke. "Stop," Bernard said. His friends turned, surprised. "What did you say?" asked Lucas, the group's informal leader. "I said stop. Leave the kid alone." Lucas laughed, thinking it was a joke. "Since when did you go soft, Bernard?" "Since now." And Bernard stood up, grabbed his backpack and went to sit at another table away from the group. The silence that followed was absolute. No one challenged Lucas. No one left the group. But Bernard had just done both. In the following days, Bernard became an outcast at school. His former friends ignored him, spread rumors about him, committed the same small cruelties he used to inflict on others. And for the first time he understood what it was like to be on the other side. It was hard. There were nights when he almost went back, almost begged to be accepted back into the group. But then he would think of Gabriel, sleeping under an awning, and his own loneliness in an expensive private school seemed ridiculously small in comparison. Bernard started researching homelessness, poverty, social inequality. He read articles, watched documentaries, tried to understand the world that had always existed just a few miles from his mansion, but that he had chosen to ignore. And the more he learned, the more ashamed he became of who he had been. One afternoon, Bernard snuck out of the house and went to the Midtown area. He searched for Gabriel for hours, discreetly asking street vendors, people who seemed to know the streets. Finally, someone led him to Walter. The old man looked at the rich boy with suspicion. "What do you want?" "I want to talk to Gabriel. I need to apologize. You and your family have done enough harm to that boy." "I know," Bernard said, and there were genuine tears in his eyes. "Please, I just want to say I'm sorry." Walter studied the boy's face for a long moment. He had seen a lot in his life, had developed an instinct for telling truth from lies, and he saw truth in those young eyes. "Wait here," he said. Gabriel appeared a few minutes later, tense and ready to run, but when he saw it was Bernard, alone and clearly nervous, he hesitated. "I know you have no reason to listen to me," Bernard began, the words tumbling out. "I know I did horrible things. I used you, I humiliated you, I put you in danger. And I have no excuse, no justification. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, truly. And if there's anything I can do to help, anything at all, I'll do it." Gabriel was silent for a moment. He had every right to send Bernard away, to refuse the apology, to hold a grudge. But Gabriel had learned from his mother before she got lost that to forgive was to free oneself, not just the other person. "You're forgiven," Gabriel said simply. Bernard let out a sigh of relief so deep he almost collapsed. "Thank you, seriously, thank you so much. But is your dad still looking for me?" "He is, he hasn't given up. He's obsessed with this idea of profiting from you." Bernard hesitated, then continued. "I can try to help. I can warn you when he sends someone to look for you. I don't know, something." And so began an unlikely friendship. Bernard started visiting Gabriel regularly. At first, they just talked, the rich boy learning about life on the streets, the street boy learning that not all rich people were the same. Then Bernard started bringing things, food, blankets, clothes, not as condescending charity, but as a genuinely concerned friend. One day, Bernard brought his entire allowance in cash and asked Gabriel to distribute it among the homeless people who needed it most. Gabriel was touched by the trust. Together, they bought food and took it to several people living on the nearby streets. It was the first time Bernard felt like he was doing something that truly mattered. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Ronald was facing his own trial. His daughter, Larissa, had gone to the doctor after weeks of feeling tired and having a persistent fever. The tests came back with a devastating diagnosis: leukemia in an advanced stage. Ronald, who had spent years despising the poor and the sick, suddenly found himself on the other side. He saw his daughter, beautiful and full of life, withering away in a hospital bed. The doctors talked about aggressive treatments, chemotherapy, a bone marrow transplant. They also talked about astronomical costs. The driver went to Octavian to beg for help. After all, he had served the family faithfully for over a decade. Surely that counted for something. "I need a loan, Mr. Hawthorne," Ronald said, his pride swallowed by necessity. "My daughter is very sick. The treatments cost a fortune and our insurance doesn't cover everything." Octavian looked at the driver without a drop of compassion. "And what do I get out of it?" Ronald blinked, confused. "Sir?" "You want money. I want the street boy. Help me find Gabriel, and I'll pay for your daughter's treatment." It was like being punched in the gut. Ronald looked at the man he had served for years and finally saw him for who he really was. He saw the cruelty, the selfishness, the complete lack of humanity. And, worse, he saw a reflection of himself, of who he had been until recently. "No," Ronald said, his voice trembling but firm. "I won't do that." "Then don't count on my help," Octavian replied, turning back to his papers. Ronald left, devastated. He cried in the car, he cried at home, he cried beside the hospital bed where Larissa slept, pale and fragile. His wife, Marilyn, tried to console him, but she was in pieces herself. It was Larissa who, in a moment of lucidity between chemotherapy sessions, held her father's hand and said, "Dad, you did the right thing. No matter what happens to me, you did the right thing." Those words broke Ronald completely, but they also rebuilt him. He understood that his daughter, even sick, had more character than he had shown in years. The following days were the hardest of Ronald's life. Larissa worsened quickly. The doctors were not optimistic. The family began to prepare for the worst, though no one wanted to say it out loud. It was Bernard who found out about Larissa. He overheard Ronald on the phone with his wife, his voice heavy with despair. The boy felt a pang in his chest. Despite everything Ronald had done, his daughter didn't deserve to suffer. That night Bernard went to Gabriel and told him everything. "I know I have no right to ask for anything, but Ronald's daughter is dying. Leukemia. She's a good person, Gabriel. She volunteers, helps others. She's not like her father." Gabriel grew thoughtful. "You want me to pray for her?" "I do, but I'll understand if you don't want to. Ronald treated you badly." Gabriel thought about what Jesus said about forgiving 70 times 7, about loving your enemies, about doing good to those who persecute you. It wasn't easy. Part of him wanted to say no, wanted Ronald to feel the pain he had caused. But a larger part, the part that still believed in goodness despite everything, knew what he had to do. "Take me to her," Gabriel said. Bernard's eyes widened. "Really? But it's risky. If my dad finds out where you are..." "It doesn't matter. Someone needs help." That night, Bernard took Gabriel to the hospital. They used the back entrance, went up the service stairs. Larissa was in a private room sleeping with Marilyn sitting beside her in an uncomfortable chair. The mother woke with a start when they entered, but Bernard quickly explained who Gabriel was and why they were there. Marilyn looked at the street boy, at his bare feet and simple clothes, and something in her heart opened up. "You're the boy who healed Mr. Hawthorne," she whispered. "It wasn't me, ma'am, but I can pray for your daughter if you'll let me." Marilyn nodded, tears streaming down her face. Gabriel approached the bed where Larissa slept. The young woman was unrecognizable, her face swollen from medication, her thin hair falling out. But even so, there was a sweetness in her features that Gabriel recognized as genuine kindness. He placed his small hand on Larissa's and closed his eyes. He prayed in silence, as he always did. He didn't ask for spectacles or instant miracles. He just asked that God would take care of this young woman, that he would ease her suffering, that he would give the family strength to face whatever came. He prayed with the pure heart of a child who still believed that goodness would win. When he finished, he opened his eyes and saw Marilyn crying quietly. Bernard's eyes were red too. "Thank you," Marilyn whispered. "Thank you so much." Gabriel just nodded, and they left as they had come, silent as shadows. In the following days, something extraordinary happened. Larissa began to get better, slowly at first, so subtly that the doctors thought it was just a normal fluctuation. But then she started to regain her color, her strength to talk more. New tests were done, and more tests, and more. A week after Gabriel's visit, the doctors called Ronald and Marilyn in for a meeting. The oncologist, a serious man with a tired look, held the test results with an expression of utter perplexity. "I don't know how to explain this," he said, "but the leukemia appears to be in complete remission. The cancer cells have simply vanished." Marilyn collapsed in tears. Ronald was paralyzed, unable to process it. "How is that possible?" he finally managed to ask. "It's not possible," the doctor answered honestly. "Not at the stage she was in, but it's happening anyway." Ronald knew. In the depths of his heart, he knew exactly how it had happened. He went to Larissa's room where she was awake and smiling for the first time in weeks. He held his daughter's hand and cried like he hadn't cried since he was a child. "It was the boy, wasn't it?" Larissa asked softly. "Gabriel, I dreamed about him. I dreamed he was here, praying for me." Ronald nodded, unable to speak. "Then go to him, Dad. Go thank him, and ask for his forgiveness, for everything." It took Ronald 2 days to gather the courage. When he finally found Gabriel, at the same awning where the boy always was, the driver fell to his knees in front of the child. "Forgive me," Ronald said, sobbing. "For everything. For treating you badly. For helping. My boss hunt you for looking at you with contempt. Forgive me and let me thank you. You saved my daughter." Gabriel helped the man to his feet. "You don't need to kneel to me, and it wasn't me who saved your daughter. You know who it was." Ronald nodded. For the first time in a long time, he understood what true humility, true gratitude meant. That same day, Ronald quit his job. He could no longer work for Octavian Hawthorne, not after seeing clearly who the man was. He started working as a rideshare driver. It wasn't glamorous, it didn't pay as well, but it gave him freedom and dignity. And every week, without fail, Ronald would show up in the area where Gabriel stayed. He brought food to distribute among the homeless. He talked with them, learned their names, their stories. He undid, one day at a time, years of prejudice and indifference. Larissa, completely cured, changed her major in college. She dropped business administration and decided to study nursing. She wanted to care for people, to pay back the second chance she had been given. She began an internship at public hospitals, working with underprivileged patients, bringing not only medical care but also hope. The story of Larissa's cure spread, just as Octavian's had. People began to talk more openly about Gabriel, about the street boy who had a special gift. Some believed, others scoffed, but no one could deny that strange and wonderful things happened around that boy. Gabriel's fame grew like an unstoppable wave. Social media buzzed with theories, speculation, and heated debates. Some called him a saint, others a charlatan. Most simply didn't know what to think of an 8-year-old boy who seemed to bring about impossible cures through simple prayers. Octavian watched all of this with a mixture of anger and fascination. He had lost control of the situation. Gabriel was more protected than ever, surrounded not only by the street community, but now also by people like Ronald and even Octavian's own son. The businessman's obsession with capturing the boy and profiting from his gift had turned into something sick. It was in this context that Veronica received a desperate call. It was her sister Helen who lived in Philadelphia. Her voice trembled on the phone. "Veronica, I need your help. The doctors found a tumor in my brain. They say it's inoperable. They say I have 6 months at most." Veronica felt the floor disappear from under her feet. She and Helen had a complicated relationship, full of rivalry and old resentments, but they were still sisters. The news hit her with unexpected force. "Is there any treatment?" Veronica asked, already knowing the answer. "Chemotherapy to try to shrink it, but the doctors aren't optimistic. It's very aggressive, in a place they can't operate." Helen paused. "I heard about the boy, the one who healed Octavian, and that young woman with leukemia. Do you think he could? Do you think you could?" Veronica had never truly believed the story of Octavian's miracle. She thought it had been some medical error, a misdiagnosis, anything but a miracle. But now, with her sister begging for help, she couldn't afford the luxury of skepticism. "I'll try," Veronica promised. For the first time in years, Veronica had a real conversation with Octavian. She told him about Helen, about the tumor, about the desperation in her sister's voice, and she asked for something she had never asked for before: help. "You know the boy," she said. "You know where he is. Please, Octavian. It's my sister." Octavian saw an opportunity. "I'll help, but on one condition. If the boy heals Helen, she will speak publicly about it. She'll give interviews, tell the story. This will increase the value of his gift, and when I finally manage to bring him to work for me, we'll profit much more." Veronica felt disgusted, but she was desperate. She agreed. It was Bernard whom Octavian sent to find Gabriel this time. The businessman knew his son had contact with the boy, and that Gabriel trusted him. Bernard initially refused, but when he learned it was to help a sick person, he hesitated. "Is this a trap from my father?" Bernard asked directly. "Probably," Octavian admitted. "But the woman is really sick, and if you don't help, she's going to die anyway, so the choice is yours." Bernard went to Gabriel and told him everything. He hid nothing, didn't try to manipulate. He just presented the facts. A woman was dying. She needed help. But his father likely had ulterior motives. Gabriel thought for a long moment. "I'll pray for her," he said finally. "But far away from your father, I don't want to be near him." So it was arranged that Helen would come to New York and meet Gabriel in a neutral place. Ronald offered his car. Larissa, the nurse in training, offered to accompany them. Mrs. Davis, the former housekeeper who had been fired for helping Gabriel, also wanted to be present. They met in a small church in the city centre. Helen arrived leaning on Veronica's arm. She was visibly weak, her face pale, her eyes sunken. Gabriel looked at her and felt a deep compassion. "Ma'am," the boy said, "I can pray for you, but I can't promise anything. I'm not the one who heals." "I know," Helen replied, her voice weak, "but I need hope. I need to believe there's a chance." Gabriel held her hands and prayed. He prayed with the same sincerity as always, with the same unwavering faith. When he finished, Helen thanked him with tears in her eyes. But the days passed and nothing happened. Helen continued to worsen. The headaches became stronger, the seizures more frequent. 2 weeks after the prayer, she was even worse than before. Helen felt betrayed, furious. She had placed all her hope in that boy and nothing had happened. In her pain and desperation, she made a terrible decision. She would expose Gabriel as a fraud. She gave an explosive interview to the same television program that had run the first report on Gabriel. Crying before the cameras, she accused the boy of being a charlatan, of playing with the hopes of desperate people, of using others' faith to gain fame. "He has no gift," Helen said bitterly. "It's all a lie, and you," she pointed at the camera, "are helping to spread this sham." The interview went viral. In a matter of hours, Gabriel went from a possible saint to an alleged fraud. Social media turned against him with frightening violence. People who had once defended him now attacked him. Conspiracy theories emerged, that he was part of a larger scam, that someone was profiting from his image, that the previous healings had been staged. The press camped out in the area where Gabriel used to stay. Walter had to move the boy, take him to a safe place. Mrs. Francis stopped selling flowers because she was constantly accosted by reporters. The lives of everyone around Gabriel turned into a living hell. And Octavian saw his perfect opportunity. If Gabriel was being seen as a fraud, accusing him criminally would be easy. The businessman hired the best lawyers money could buy and filed a lawsuit accusing Gabriel of fraud, exploitation of Octavian's image, and extortion. The accusations were absurd, but they had power. Gabriel was a homeless miner, with no legal representation, no resources. Octavian had an army of lawyers and political connections. The case began to move forward with terrifying speed. That's when something unexpected happened. Cecilia, Gabriel's mother, reappeared. She had spent the last few months in a free recovery center for addicts. She had fought her demons, had fallen and gotten back up, had cried and prayed. And finally, for the first time in over a year, she was sober. Completely sober. When she saw on television that her son was being sued, that he was being hunted by a rich businessman, something inside her awakened. The maternal instinct that had been dormant under the alcohol roared back to life. Cecilia sought help. She went to the church where she had seen Gabriel at that meeting with Helen. There she found Mrs. Davis, who recognized her as the mother Gabriel sometimes spoke of. The two women talked, and Mrs. Davis saw true sincerity in Cecilia's eyes. "I need to protect my son," Cecilia said, "but I don't know how. I have no money, no lawyer, no anything." "But you have something no one else has," Mrs. Davis replied. "You're his mother, and together we'll find a way." Mrs. Davis mobilized her network. She knew many people from the church, simple but determined people. One of the congregation members was a human rights lawyer, a man named Dr. Edwards, who worked pro bono for just causes. When Mrs. Davis told him Gabriel's story, Dr. Edwards didn't hesitate. "I'll take the case," he said, "and I won't charge a thing." Meanwhile, Ronald used his savings to help Cecilia rent a small room where she and Gabriel could stay. Larissa organized donations of clothes and food. Bernard, using his allowance and some jewelry he had received from his grandmother, contributed financially. Gabriel's defense was built on love and determination. Dr. Edwards worked day and night, gathering evidence that the accusations were false, showing that Gabriel had never asked for money, never promised cures, never did anything but pray when asked. The case went to trial. The courtroom was packed. On one side, Octavian's team of expensive lawyers, dressed in impeccable suits. On the other, Dr. Edwards alone in his worn but dignified suit, and beside him Cecilia, holding her son's hand tightly. The witnesses were called. Octavian's lawyers tried to paint Gabriel as a calculating manipulator. But then the defense called its witnesses. Walter testified about the boy's character, about how he shared food even when he had little, about how he prayed for everyone without asking for anything in return. Mrs. Francis told how Gabriel helped her at the market without expecting payment. Ronald, his voice emotional, spoke of his daughter's cure and how Gabriel had gone to the hospital in the middle of the night, at great risk to himself, just to help. And then Bernard was called. Octavian tensed when he saw his son stand up. Bernard walked to the stand and swore to tell the truth. And then, looking directly at his father, he told everything. He told how he had brought Gabriel to the mansion just for fun, how he had seen his father try to kidnap the boy, how he had witnessed the cruelty and greed. "My father isn't suing Gabriel because he was harmed," Bernard said, his voice firm despite his tears. "He's suing because he wants to control him. He wants to profit from him, and when he couldn't, he decided to destroy him." The silence in the room was absolute. Octavian was red with rage. Veronica looked at her husband as if seeing him for the first time. The judge, a man with a tired gaze and wisdom, gained from decades on the bench, listened to everything attentively. When the testimonies were over, he retired to deliberate. 2 hours later, he returned with the verdict. The case was dismissed for lack of evidence and because it was clear the accusations were baseless. Moreover, the judge ordered an investigation into Octavian for perjury and attempting to manipulate the justice system. The decision was devastating for Octavian. The investigation revealed not only the attempt to frame Gabriel, but an entire network of illegal business dealings, bribes, and tax evasion. His assets were frozen, his companies investigated. His partners abandoned him like rats fleeing a sinking ship. Veronica filed for divorce immediately. She took Bernard and moved into a rented apartment, far from the mansion and its bad memories. For the first time in years, she felt free. Octavian was left alone in the enormous empty mansion. His staff resigned one by one. His bank accounts were blocked. His friends stopped answering his calls. He, who had been one of New York's most powerful men, now had no one. And ironically, his legs, which had been miraculously healed, began to ache again. He didn't become paralyzed again, but the pain was constant, a physical reminder of all he had lost. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, something beautiful was happening. Cecilia had gotten a job as a cleaner in an office building. The salary was modest, but it was honest. With the help of Mrs. Davis and Ronald, she rented a small one-bedroom apartment in a simple neighborhood. Gabriel was enrolled in a public school. On the first day, he was nervous, but the teacher, Mrs. Marissa, a kind, middle-aged woman, welcomed him warmly. When the other students found out who he was, some were curious, others skeptical. But Gabriel won them all over by simply being himself, kind, humble, always willing to help. Bernard, who had been expelled from the expensive private school after the scandal involving his father, transferred to a public school as well. He and Gabriel attended different schools, but saw each other regularly. Bernard had decided he wanted to be a doctor, not for the wrong reasons he had before, when it was just another form of status, but because he genuinely wanted to help people. He started volunteering at a community health clinic in Gabriel's neighborhood. It was difficult at first, dealing with poverty so up close, seeing real suffering, but with each passing day, he felt he was becoming the person he was always meant to be. Larissa completed her nursing degree with honors. She was hired by a public hospital and quickly became known for her special care for vulnerable patients. She never forgot that she had been saved in an inexplicable way and dedicated every day to paying that grace forward. Ronald continued to work as a ride-share driver, but now with a different purpose. Whenever he saw homeless people, he would stop to talk, to offer help. He used part of his earnings to buy and distribute food. He became a known and respected figure on the city center streets. And Helen, whose anger had nearly destroyed Gabriel, lived to deeply regret her words. 2 months after that terrible interview, After she had already apologized publicly but still carried the guilt, she went to the doctor for more routine scans. The doctors performed the MRI, expecting to find the tumor even larger, even more aggressive. But what they found left them speechless. The tumor had simply disappeared, not shrunk, not stopped growing, completely gone. Helen cried for hours when she received the news. She understood, too late, that Gabriel's prayer had worked. It just hadn't been on her time, but on God's time. She sought out Gabriel and knelt before him, begging for forgiveness. "You saved me. And I accused you," she said, sobbing. "How can you forgive me?" Gabriel helped her up, just as he had done with Ronald. "You're already forgiven. God healed you. I just prayed." Helen dedicated the rest of her life to charity work. She studied theology and began visiting hospitals, offering spiritual support to terminal patients. Her story of healing became a source of hope for many. The months passed, and Gabriel's life normalized as much as possible for someone who had become famous for miracles. He still prayed for people who asked, but always with the same humility, always making it clear that he was not the one who healed. 1 year after it all began on a sunny Sunday, Gabriel, Cecilia, Walter, Mrs. Francis, Mr. Joe, Mrs. Davis, Ronald, Marilyn, Larissa, Bernard, and many others gathered in a dirt field in the neighborhood. Children played soccer barefoot, laughing and shouting. Adults chatted sitting on wooden stumps. There was simple but abundant food, shared by all. Gabriel looked around and felt his heart overflow with gratitude. Not for the fame, not for the supposed miracles, but for this, for the people, for the community, for the love that had blossomed amidst so much hardship. That night, before sleeping in his bed in the small apartment he shared with his mother, Gabriel said his prayer as he always did. He thanked God for the day. He thanked him for the people in his life. He thanked him for those who were still suffering and asked that God comfort them. And he finished as he always finished, with the words his mother had taught him so long ago. God knows all things, and in his own time, everything will be set right. And as he slept, a peaceful smile on his face, outside the city continued to turn. People still suffered. People still needed hope. But thanks to an 8-year-old boy who never lost his faith, many lives had been transformed. Not just healed of diseases, but healed of something much worse. Healed of indifference, of selfishness, of cruelty. The true miracle had never been Octavian's legs walking again or Helen's tumor disappearing. The true miracle had been hearts changing, Bernard learning compassion, Ronald discovering humility, Larissa finding purpose, Cecilia regaining her dignity, Helen finding redemption. And Gabriel, the boy who had started his story sleeping under awnings and eating scraps, now had a home. He had a family. He had people who loved him not for what he could do, but for who he was. Faith, forgiveness, and compassion had transformed not just lives, but an entire network of people connected by a boy who simply prayed and believed. And that, more than any physical cure, was the greatest miracle of all. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope Gabriel's story has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of faith, forgiveness, and transformation, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment resonated with you the most. Every day we bring intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul and remind us that goodness still exists in this world. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with another narrative that will make you reflect on the true meaning of compassion.